We'll just go ahead and get started then. Welcome everybody that's able to join us today. It's May 4th, 21 for our monthly UOCA meeting. And Doctor, take it away.
Sure thing. Well, thanks for having me, guys. My name is Faraji. I'm actually a California native, transplanted to New Jersey for about 15 years, and I moved back out to the West Coast in 2014. My wife is from Utah, so that's really what pushed the move for us. At the time, I was running a mosquito control district in Mercer County, New Jersey, the capital county where Trenton and Princeton are located. And coming out here, I really wasn't expecting to experience mosquitoes at the level that I've experienced. Mosquito control was started in New Jersey, and the salt marsh mosquitoes are just off the charts. But a typical trap night for us was about 5,000 mosquitoes back in New Jersey. And my first week here, we collected almost 20,000 mosquitoes in a single trap surrounding the wetland habitats of the Great Salt Lake. So that was a pretty big rude awakening. I thought I was coming to a hot desert environment with very few mosquitoes, but it turned out to be the exact opposite. So what I'm going to do for you guys today is kind of go through a presentation that I've put together on mosquito abatement districts. And give me 1 second. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, do you see the full screen, or is it the one with the side notes?
Side notes.
Yeah, side notes too.
Okay, that's probably the wrong one. Let me try that again. Screen one. Okay, how about now?
Still the same.
Oh, this is kind of weird. Let me close this out. I'll get this going. Let's try
I'm
this.
feeling much better, Brad.
Okay, how's that? That should hopefully do it, and you should see just a picture of a car on the screen, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so what I'll do is I'll kind of go through how mosquito abatement is set up in the state of Utah, and then I'll specifically talk about my district in particular and the things that we kind of do, which is similar to what most of the other mosquito abatement districts do. I know we got 6 or 7 of you online right now. Have you guys dealt with your local mosquito abatement districts in the past? Any interactions?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully this will be the start of increasing those interactions and really getting to know each other as we go through this. Okay. So the mosquito control structure in state of Utah is a little unique. We have what's called a hybrid system. We have some programs that are called dependent programs and some programs that are called independent. And I'll come back to this. We have a local district law that governs us. We are a special or a local district, so very similar to your sewer or water districts. There are specific laws for mosquito abatement. And we also fall under the Mosquito Abatement District Act. And I'll show you another slide on where you can find additional information on this. We are primarily funded through property taxes. That's what really provides the finances for every aspect of our operation. And we really do have general broad authority to control not just mosquitoes, but other insects as well. Now, for the most part, very few of us venture outside of that box. Our concentration is primarily on mosquitoes, but we do have a program that controls black flies, for example, in South Salt Lake Valley. Ticks are starting to become more and more of a nuisance and a problem for us, a public health concern for us. Every once in a while, we get calls regarding wasps and crickets, Mormon crickets, grasshoppers, biting midges, deer flies, and horse flies. But for the most part, all of our funding is really geared towards mosquitoes. So when I talk about this system of dependent and independent, what I'm talking about is if you're a dependent district, you're an autonomous unit of government. You're essentially a special district or a local district. The property taxes come directly over to you and you have no additional oversight besides from your board of directors. But if you're an independent program, you're generally falling under a county operation or a city operation or a public health department. So you don't really get to control your finances as much. That really does have its pros and cons. The dependent districts can make quick decisions and really get going with things. But the bad part is we don't have a purchasing department or a payroll department or a human resources. We kind of have to do it all ourselves. And in my case, for example, I'm an entomologist. I'm a bug guy. I went to school to study insects because I just absolutely love mosquitoes and all insects. And then all of a sudden I'm put in charge of these multi-million-dollar government agencies, and we have to learn how to do budgeting. We got to learn finances and worry about insurance and workman's comp and all these other shenanigans that we really weren't trained for, but you kind of learn it as you go along. On the other hand, if you're an independent program, you have access to your county attorneys, your county payroll, county purchasing. But the bad part is, since you don't control your funding, if it's a bad snow year, for example, they may tap into your funding and use it for snow removal because nobody's using pesticides in the winter. And so they don't worry about that until the summer rolls around. So those are generally the pros and cons of the dependent and independent programs. Now, in the state of Utah, we actually have 24 agencies that conduct mosquito abatement services. 14 of them are the special districts or the local districts. They are the specific mosquito abatement districts. Here's a list of those districts, and I can share this presentation with you guys. You guys are more than welcome to send it out as a PDF to the rest of your members, just for quick access and some of the websites. But if you do go to our Utah Mosquito Abatement Association website, umaa.org, you can find a listing of all of these districts. So I'm located over here in Salt Lake City Mosquito Abatement District, an independent program. But if you look at Utah County, for example, they actually fall under their Department of Health. And we have other programs that fall within county programs or city programs like Logan, Rich, and those are some examples of the different levels of organization. Now, when it comes to the actual law, I know some of this stuff kind of gets a little bit boring, but it does involve you guys. And I hope this is where the interaction between us can kind of start to increase. We actually have broad authority to exterminate all insects, as we talked about earlier. And this does, the Mosquito Abatement Act actually allows us to access public and private property. Now, for the most part, we generally never utilize that authority because it gets a little complicated, as you guys can imagine. You deal with this a lot more than we actually do. But if we do have an issue in somebody's private property, somebody's backyard, somebody's business, that's when we bring in folks like you guys. That's when we bring in the health department to assist us with not only access, but more importantly, compliance and citations to ensure that that issue is addressed. Now, what is interesting is that the state of Utah does not have express statewide requirements for private property owners to actually maintain their properties in regards to mosquitoes. So again, this is where having that collaborative effort is much more advantageous for us. Here's a copy of the Mosquito Abatement District Act, as I'm sure you guys are well familiar with the state code and state statutes, but here's the website address if anybody does want to check this down the line. Now, what we do in mosquito control falls under what we call One Health. This is a huge movement within public health, which really realizes and understands that our individual health is directly related to animal health and also the environment or environmental health. Well, what's beautiful about this One Health approach is when we look at this from a public health perspective and we think about mosquito control, almost every single variable within One Health falls under what we actually do. We deal with zoonotic infections. We're dealing with vaccines, with sanitations, parasite infections, ecology, biology, overall human medicine, microbiology. We have full microbiology level 3 laboratories at our facility where we do actual pathogen testing for different mosquito-borne arboviruses. But more importantly, this is all interrelated. So every aspect of our operations ends up impacting or being dependent on another aspect of this One Health approach. So it's a great profession to be in because it's very, very rewarding at the end of the day. Now, our district, Salt Lake City Mosquito Abatement District, was actually created in 1923. our district was the impetus behind the state of Utah developing the Mosquito Control Act. And overall, when you look at the entire nation, we were the third state to create legislation for the creation of Mosquito Abatement District. The first state was New Jersey, as we talked about, right around the turn of the century. That was followed by California and then Utah. So that should speak volumes to the problems associated with mosquitoes in our state, which I didn't really know much about until I moved out here. And by the way, if you guys have any questions, since this is only a few of you guys on here, by all means, feel free to interrupt me as we go along. My district has a $4 million budget. We are completely independent. We have 10 full-time staff. We are increasing our table of organization to about 15 in the next couple of years. And we hire about 30 seasonal employees every single year. Most of them are college students that work with us, mostly during their college careers. They love this job and they come back throughout their 4 years or 5 years. And some of them end up staying with us for much longer than that as well. And by the way, we are in the process of hiring our seasonal staff right now. So if any of you have any college age students, relatives, children that are interested in a position, send them our way. The application can be found directly through our website, and we'd love to put them to work and teach them about public health and mosquito and vector control. Here is a boundary of my jurisdiction. We service Salt Lake City and Salt Lake City only. To the south of me, about 33 south, there is another district called the South Salt Lake Valley Mosquito Abatement District. So that services, I heard you guys talking about Murray earlier. So the city of Murray would fall under the South Salt Lake Valley Mosquito Abatement District. To the north of me is the Mosquito Abatement District Davis, which provides services for the entire Davis County. To the southwest of me is the Magna Mosquito Abatement District, and directly to the west of me is the Tooele Valley Mosquito Abatement District. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the 5 different entities that are just within the Great Salt Lake Valley. All of us practice what's called a integrated mosquito management. This is very similar to the concept of integrated pest management that you may have heard about, with the big difference being here is that we don't use economic thresholds in order to intervene with control measures. We value every single life equally, so we don't really have a financial need to intervene with these measures. Instead, we utilize our surveillance or science to justify all aspects of our operations. And I'll show you some details with that as we go along. But all in all, if we look at our overall organization within this IMM, about a third of our time is spent doing surveillance, about a third of our time is spent doing actual control, killing mosquitoes, and then about a third of our time is spent doing public education, outreach activities, a lot of training and operations, and also a lot of research. But interestingly, if I divide our actual effort within the surveillance and control, you'll notice about half of our time within surveillance is conducted doing larval surveillance. That's looking for juvenile mosquitoes in aquatic habitats. And half of it is spent doing adult mosquito surveillance, trapping for adult biting mosquitoes. But interestingly, when you look at control, about 90% of our time is spent doing larval control or larviciding. That's when we apply an insecticide directly to the aquatic habitat. And only about 5 to 10% of our operations is spent doing adulticiding. Now, that's a little bit of a surprise for the general public and probably some of you that are on this call right now, because everybody assumes that mosquito control is that truck that's driving down the road spraying an insecticide from the back. And I bet some of you sitting in the audience right now remember the days of those trucks running down the streets. And yeah, we do that, but it's really only a last resort for us. If we can control mosquitoes in the aquatic habitat, we would much prefer to do that because mosquitoes are confined to that aquatic habitat, and we can use insecticides that are very target specific, and they will not have non-target effects on other beneficial organisms. But adulticiding or spraying is a little bit more complicated. It's very effective for mosquitoes, but if I wait until mosquitoes are on the wing and I treat them, I'm going to kill the adult mosquitoes, but unless I'm getting to the source, they're going to quickly repopulate that area. So that's a constant game that we really don't want to play, and we would much rather put all of our efforts into larviciding. I mentioned that integrated mosquito management. This is really a comprehensive scientific approach to knowing thy enemy. We want to completely understand the biology, the ecology of the insect pest that we're targeting, and we utilize that surveillance measure to drive all aspects of these control interventions. Now, I mentioned surveillance. Surveillance for us is really divided into three different components. One is the larval surveillance, looking for the juvenile mosquitoes. One is the adult surveillance, sampling and monitoring adult biting populations. And then the other aspect is called the vector surveillance or disease surveillance. And that's testing the mosquitoes for potential pathogen infection rates. And I'll talk about these in a little bit as well. So when it comes to adult surveillance, we use a variety of different traps to sample for mosquitoes. Our bread and butter is the host-seeking trap, which basically uses dry ice or carbon dioxide to attract mosquitoes. All animals breathe out carbon dioxide. That's what's called a olfactory cue, or a signal that mosquitoes utilize to find their host. So as long as you're breathing out CO2, you're going to be attracting mosquitoes. So what we do is we mimic that by using condensed carbon dioxide in these traps that are mostly battery operated. So as the mosquitoes are coming towards this source, they get collected, they get suctioned down into that net that's at the bottom. And that helps us determine mosquito abundance levels. It helps us determine the species composition, because not all mosquitoes are the same, and it's important for us to know which species we're dealing with. There's about 26 different species in Salt Lake Valley alone that cause problems for us. And then most importantly, we test these specimens so that way we know what the infection rates and potential disease risk to our human populations is. We also use resting box traps to collect resting adult mosquitoes. We also have oviposition traps that collect gravid, or mosquitoes that are ready to oviposit their eggs or lay their eggs. These traps are situated strategically throughout our jurisdiction. The blue that you see are the carbon dioxide baited traps that are mostly out in the west side of our district. That's to ensure that we're collecting those floodwater mosquitoes that are coming out of those wetland habitats. And then in the city or urban component of our operations, we use those gravid traps or those oviposition traps to collect mosquitoes that are ready to lay their eggs. All of these mosquitoes get sampled, they get pooled, they get speciated, enumerated, and then they're put on test. And we develop what's called a MFIR, or a minimum field infection rate, that lets us know the number of positive mosquitoes that were tested within a given sample at a specific location and time. And that number, or that threshold, will help determine our intervention efforts. In addition to that, we monitor the abundance. So here's a list of our carbon dioxide baited traps, for example. They're starting out in the western side of our district, going towards the Great Salt Lake, and they go a little bit farther east. So you can tell just from this number, this is just a snapshot on August 3rd and 5th from last year. My peak within that given week was about 10,000 mosquitoes in a single trap. So when you put all this together, that's quite an overabundance of mosquitoes that are just found in the 40,000 acres of wetland habitats on the west side of our district. We also use a sophisticated GIS system that we have set up for the entire state of Utah. This is available to our public health departments and also the mosquito abatement districts. This really allows us to even further look at geographic information systems and divide our districts into smaller zones, or look at historic patterns of mosquito abundance or activity. And from an operational or applied perspective, this is a very valuable tool, because I can quickly map out where the abundance of these mosquitoes are. So on this map, for example, the airport is right in the smack dab center of this map. The pies tell you, the size of the pies tell you how many mosquitoes were found within that specific location. So you can see on here that the bigger pie has about 97, almost 10,000 mosquitoes in it. But more importantly, when you look at the color of the pie, that tells you what species we're dealing with. So for example, on this snapshot on August 5th of last year, you see a lot of red on here. Red designates a species called Culex tarsalis, which is a very public health important mosquito for us. It's a nuisance mosquito that loves to bite people, but more importantly, it can vector or carry and transmit different mosquito-borne viruses, such as West Nile virus, St. Louis encephalitis, and Western equine encephalitis. So when I see a lot of red on this map, I know I got to get on my guys to get out there and conduct additional control measures to bring those populations and those species down. Now, if I switch and I look at a snapshot from September, for example, the numbers are about the same. The abundance is about the same, but you see a lot of blue on here now. The blue designates a species called Aedes dorsalis, which is just a nuisance mosquito. It loves to bite people, but fortunately, it doesn't transmit a lot of arboviruses. So it's not a public health important mosquito for us. So from my perspective, when I look at something like this, all of a sudden control measures are not as risky. So that way we can kind of take our time or maybe not even conduct an aerial application to bring these populations down. So species composition, abundance, pathogen infection rates are extremely important for us. Now, when it comes to control, I mentioned we conduct larval control and adult control. I'll talk about larval control first. Our first and foremost offense against mosquitoes is really source reduction and habitat modification. Mosquitoes, juvenile mosquitoes, only thrive in standing water. So as long as the water is moving, that habitat is not going to produce mosquitoes. So a lot of times what we like to do is just go out and ensure that the water is flowing. So if that can be done through minor ditch work, through ditch clearings, or even picking up and conducting sanitation work, we would prefer to do that. So that's always the first measure of control. Now, how does that relate to you guys? Well, every once in a while, we end up in the urban jungle and we find habitats like this. There is a plethora of container habitats that hold water. So if you have a sprinkler system that may be running, if you have a sudden rain event, all of these containers are going to collect water. And if they're collecting water, they can eventually produce mosquitoes for us. So this becomes a big issue for us. So remember, I mentioned that we do have property access, but we generally try to work with the residents to ensure access for us. But most importantly, we don't have enforcement on our side. We can't issue citations. So I don't want to go back to a property like this over and over again if I can get the homeowner to clean it up and thus reduce the mosquito problems. Now, this is a pretty exaggerated example from the urban jungle. But believe it or not, this happens in suburbia as well. And this is actually much more difficult for us in the suburban jungle, because a lot of times you end up with a kid's toy truck. You end up with a plant saucer that's collecting water. This is a much better, well-maintained, manicured lot. You got a lot of vegetation, a lot of landscaping that's done here, but that translates to a lot of standing water in the bottom of these pots or potentially the gutter system. And I'll show you some pictures of that. So some of the typical habitats that we find are things like this, at the bottom of a basketball hoop. Believe it or not, yeah, a lot of people keep their old toilets in their backyards. I don't know why. They think they're going to use it again. And you ask them, why don't you get rid of that? And they're like, well, I may need that down the line. They never do, but they collect it and they hold on to it, and it always collects water. So these are the types of habitat where we can use your assistance by going into these properties and ensuring that these people are cleaning their backyards. Now, why is this important? Well, this is important because those habitats produce what's called invasive Aedes mosquitoes. Aedes is a genera of mosquito species. These are very, very unique for us out here. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit as well. But when I talk about invasive Aedes, I'm talking about Aedes aegypti, the yellow fever mosquito, and Aedes albopictus, the Asian tiger mosquito. Both of these are invasive species that are not native to the United States, but nonetheless, they have hitched a ride, mostly through the used tire trade. And once they become established, it is very, very difficult to control them, because unlike most mosquito species that we deal with that occur in large floodwater habitats, in large wetland habitats, in habitats where we know where they're located, and we know that after a rain event or a flood event, we can go out there and control them. On the other hand, these mosquitoes thrive in those small container habitats that I showed you. Now think about that from an operational perspective. I have almost 80,000 parcels or 80,000 residences within my jurisdiction. I don't have enough people to send my folks through every single yard to ensure that they're cleaning these habitats up or we're treating these habitats. It's nearly impossible. So we really need a proactive control measure, a proactive approach to ensuring that these species don't become established in our region, because once they do, it's nearly impossible to control them. Now, this is an issue because of global climate change and global trade and commerce. We're starting to travel a lot faster, a lot quicker, with a lot more rapidity and frequency. And global climate change is important because as our temperature is increasing, it's important to remember that insects are cold-blooded. So generally, the warmer the temperatures, the faster their rate of development. And on top of that, mosquitoes are vectors or carriers of pathogens. And these pathogens like West Nile virus, Zika virus, yellow fever, chikungunya, they also replicate much more quicker the warmer the temperature. So this is directly impacting us. It's increasing the development rate within the mosquitoes. It's increasing the development rate of the pathogen. And then more importantly, it's increasing their geographic distribution, not just in latitude and longitude, but also in elevation as well. We're starting to see mosquito species higher and higher up on the East Bench, for example. Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus are not found in Utah. You can see that Aedes aegypti, there's a little blurb down in the southwest in the St. George area. We did find it there in the mid-2000s, but fortunately it was eradicated. And I'll show you another example in just a second as well. Aedes albopictus was actually found in a nursery in South Salt Lake in the mid-2000s as well. But again, we responded quickly, we eliminated the mosquito, and fortunately, neither of them have become established. Now you may say, well, why is this even important for us? Well, it's important because things like Zika virus happen even out here in Utah where we least expected it. I hope some of you guys remember these incidents in 2016 where we actually had an elder gentleman that died as a result of Zika virus. But in addition to that, his son ended up contracting Zika virus as well. And what was interesting about that was that individual had no travel history. We did not have either of those invasive species, so the mosquitoes could not have transmitted the virus to them. And we're hoping that there wasn't a sexual transmission between the father and the son. So it ended up being that the father was so viremic, he was so sick, and he was shedding so much virus from his tears and his sweat that when he was on his hospital bed, the son ended up probably contacting him, kissing him, hugging him, and he ended up picking up the virus through those means. A pretty unique case in a hot, arid environment that we just were not expecting. Now, on top of that, I'm sorry, was there a question? Okay. On top of that, 2 years ago, we also detected Aedes aegypti in Moab. This was another invasive case that we responded to. About 7 or 8 of us from the Salt Lake area actually went down to Moab to assist them with the eradication and control campaigns against that mosquito. Fortunately, we were very, very successful because they did not come back in 2020, and we haven't seen them yet in 2021. So this is another example of mosquito control actually working. But let me show you some of the issues with that. So here's another issue that you guys can potentially help us out with. We have a lot of these junkyards, these automotive shops, these mechanic shops that collect a lot of tires. And tires are the greatest container habitat for these invasive mosquitoes, because no matter how you place a tire, whether it's upside down on its side, if it's outside, it's going to collect debris, it's going to collect leaves, and it's going to collect water after rain events. And the leaves provide the nutrients for the mosquitoes. And so you end up with this really protected, humid, wet environment for mosquitoes to develop in. So when we see things like this is where we really need help in ensuring that these tires are covered up, that they're put inside some sort of a storage facility, or in the minimum that they're treated. And if a shop is collecting tires for no reason whatsoever, they should be getting rid of that so that way it doesn't end up becoming an issue. Now, so that was one of the sites in Moab where we actually found Aedes aegypti, that invasive mosquito. But in addition to that, gutters also create a problem for us. Sometimes these downspouts create a problem. They're collecting water. A lot of buckets, containers that are on the side. This was a trash can that was loaded with mosquitoes. I don't know what it was used for, but they just had it on the side and they were collecting water in it. But the greatest containers that we noticed down in Moab were these animal watering troughs. Because it is hot, because it is arid down there, people are really providing a lot of containers for animals to feed on, whether it's their chickens, their horses, their dogs, their cats, whatever the case may be. So when it comes to something like this is when we need to ensure that these containers are dumped out about every 7 to 10 days to ensure that the mosquitoes are not able to undergo their entire developmental cycle. Now, on top of that, when we talk about our programs, we also have a very healthy biological control program. We rear a fish called Gambusia affinis. We do this every single year. We place them in about 5,000 to 7,000 ponds in any given year. We have full fish rearing facilities where we conduct this work, and we have 2 inspectors that are dedicated to this job. So they come in every day, they collect the fish, they go out and they place them within these residential ornamental ponds or sometimes abandoned swimming pools. So here's another aspect where the 2 of us can actually work hand in hand. A lot of times we end up with some pools that are in way worse shape than others. Some folks actually want to get their pools up and running. And if they do, we generally work with them. So from my perspective, I don't want to send an inspector out every single week to treat this habitat with an insecticide. I'm wasting his time, I'm wasting taxpayer dollars, I'm wasting insecticides by doing this every week. So instead, we rear the fish, we place the fish within this habitat, the fish propagate themselves and they'll eat the mosquito larvae that are found in there. And that'll take us throughout the entire season. When the habitat does freeze in the winter, or if the homeowner wants to get the pool up and running, we just get rid of the fish essentially, and we start this process again the following year. Now, where you guys come in is by providing us access to some of these locations or issuing citations to these folks to clean up these pools. This is a pool that's actually in good shape, but some of them are starting to be run down. Some folks start to abandon their backyards, their fences are falling down. And all of a sudden, not only is it a public health concern, it's also an environmental health and an obstacle health to children that maybe jumped in the fence going in their backyard. So we would much rather see those pools get filled in or gotten rid of completely instead of us conducting a insecticide application or even putting our biological control organism in there. But when we do have to make applications, larvicide applications, we use mostly what's called biopesticides or biorational insecticides. We use mostly bacteria that mosquitoes feed on. This is conducted by hand applications, by backpack applications, by ATVs, or by tracked vehicles. In addition to that, every catch basin in the city is also treated by a biker team. So every curbside gutter and every catch basin produces a specific mosquito species that's a primary vector of West Nile virus. So we treat these on a regular basis throughout the course of the season. We'll generally do this 3, maybe 4 times, depending on the environmental conditions and the availability of our college workforce. In addition to that, believe it or not, there are tree holes that produce another specific mosquito that's responsible for the transmission of dog heartworm. So throughout the city, Salt Lake County, actually, as a matter of fact, the tree holes are marked by, they're geocoded. We have GPS locations of all these tree holes, but they're also further marked by a small little blue spray paint. And we have a team of 4 individuals that come in every day. They pick up their trucks and their ladders and they go out and they inspect and they treat all of those tree holes. Now, when the habitat gets a little too big for us, we do have airplanes that we conduct to do larval control measures. These are conducted during the day, and also talk about our adult control measures in a little bit as well. And then in addition to that, we also are utilizing more and more drones. We actually have 3 drones or unmanned aerial systems that we utilize to conduct both surveillance and control measures in a lot of our aquatic habitats. We have some unique areas that make it difficult for the airplane to get into, for example, under power lines or within a close vicinity of Salt Lake International Airport. So this is where these drones are becoming very, very handy for us to get in and make those applications. Now, on top of that, I mentioned adult control, and by far this is probably the most controversial aspect of our operations. And I just want to talk about this briefly to kind of educate you guys about how we do this. We do this either through truck-mounted applications or through aerial applications. These adult control measures are called ultra-low volume because we use a very small amount of actual product to do this. They are only conducted at night after sunset, and they are only conducted when deemed absolutely necessary through our surveillance measures. We use mostly pyrethroids and an organophosphate product to conduct these applications. When it comes to mosquito applications, the reason why we call them ultra low volume is because we're only using about 0.5 or 1.5 ounces of product. This is very, very different than agricultural applications, which sometimes use gallons on a per acre basis. So when it comes to our operations, I want you to think about it as essentially a 1 ounce of material that's put over an acre. Now think about an acre as about being roughly the size of a football field. So it's essentially just a shot glass of material that's put over that entire football field. And we do that through pushing this product through a high pressure system where we create these tiny, tiny droplets. So what you're looking at on the screen right now is actually a human hair. A human average hair is about 50 micrometers in width. The droplets that we create are about 7 to 22 microns or micrometers in size. So not only is it a small amount of product, it's a very minuscule droplet size as well. The way that we do this is, if you think about that shot glass essentially holding the same volume that a golf ball will, our high pressure system makes the golf ball smaller, turns it into a marble and then a BB. And so essentially when you look at that amount, we're creating about 10 million 20 micron size droplets just from that single ounce of product. Now that's put out by airplanes over those wetland habitats that I showed you earlier. We never do this over the city, so this is not conducted over urban or suburban habitats. It is completely safe to do that. Many other states do that, but because of our unique geography out here, most of our mosquito problems are out on the west side in the rural habitat. So what we're really trying to do is prevent their dispersal into the city. So we'll run our Piper Aztecs that make these applications. Our actual application rate is 0.75 ounces to the acre. We generally treat from about a height of about 100 feet. And again, as I mentioned, after sunset, so that way we're also limiting our potential non-target effects, especially to our pollinators, such as the bees. Every time we do this, we generate these detailed figures and abundance data. So this, for example, is again from that August 3rd. Our threshold is 300 mosquitoes to intervene with an adult control measure. But as you can tell, the numbers are well above 300 almost every single day. When we conduct these applications, this is what the arrow indicates where those applications were conducted. And then we always do follow-up counts to see if our intervention was effective. So generally, you want to see a downward trend following your control impact. In addition to our surveillance data, we also get detailed reports from our aerial applicator that lets us know where they were, what they used, how much of it they used, what their spray route looked like, and most importantly, what the environmental conditions were like during those applications. So multiple levels of transparency and accountability. Now, briefly, I'm going to talk about pesticide registrations in case you guys ever get this question from members of the public or if you want to know yourselves. Every pesticide that we utilize is regulated through the Environmental Protection Agency under the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. What that means is that before a product is made into a label and that label is provided to us, the EPA requires multiple years of environmental data, biological assessments, toxicological data, environmental fate deposition data to ensure that these products are safe for us to use within our industry. And we strictly adhere to the label. The label is considered federal law. And so every application that we make is generally well under even the application rates that are stipulated under there. Now, we're also further regulated through the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System under the Clean Water Act. So this is an additional federal level of regulation that we also abide by. And then we're also even further regulated at the local level through the Utah Pesticide Discharge Elimination System. We have a pesticide discharge management plan that's approved by the Department of Agriculture, and every single one of our employees are licensed pesticide applicators, again, regulated through Utah Department of Ag. Now, on top of all this, all pesticides are required to be re-registered every 15 years under the Food Quality Protection Act. This is to ensure that the latest data, the latest science, the latest information is being used to develop these labels. So this is a very normal process for all insecticides to undergo. But at the end of the day, the Environmental Protection Agency does these evaluations to ensure that when these pesticides are used according to these label requirements, that they do not pose any adverse impacts on the environment, on wildlife, or the people. So we feel extremely safe in the way that we are utilizing these insecticides to protect public health. Now, the other thing I'm going to leave you with is just a little bit of research, because remember I mentioned that about a third of our time is spent doing research. We do this on a yearly basis with a multitude of different projects that we're involved in. And one that I'm just going to tell you briefly about is called the Spartan Mosquito Eradicator. This company came up with this device that they were selling to homeowners and also a lot of smaller mosquito control programs, a lot of those dependent mosquito control programs that I told you about. That may be one individual full-time teacher that runs a mosquito control program in the summer, for example. This was supposed to be a quick fix. You basically fill this device with water, you put it in your backyard, and they were advertising this as getting rid of all of your mosquitoes and mosquito problems. The active ingredient in this device was salt. And the salinity level that's found in this device was actually lower than what's found in human blood. So if mosquitoes can feed on human blood, if they can process the salt content of your human blood, we knew that this device was going to be totally bogus and snake oil. Now, bear in mind, this was a $300 million company. So 300 million gross sales annually. So we actually evaluated this product last year. We scientifically proved that it was ineffective and it was just essentially junked. We published a paper in the Journal of Medical Entomology. We got the state of Utah to remove the sale license for this product. And then additionally, Amazon ended up pulling the product from their website as well. So now you cannot buy this product online whatsoever. So we're very proud of that. And this is just another aspect of the things that we do to ensure that we're doing mosquito control, not just for the residents of Salt Lake City, but for the profession and the greater good of public health nationwide. So I'll leave it with that and I'll turn it back over to you guys. If you guys have any questions or anything that you want to bring up or anything that we can do better from our end in the mosquito control world.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I have a question. And I'm always exploring different things, but I had a wasp nest that nested in one of my cellar doors. And I found it quite by accident when I was cleaning, and I used a chemical that is a citrus. I was cleaning with this citrus chemical, and it eradicated the wasp nest completely out of the air. I mean, when they were flying.
Sure.
And just the other day, I had a swarm of ants that had swarmed this spring. And I thought, well, if it takes care of wasps, maybe it'll do it for ants. And I just took a sprayer with the light mist, and it took care of the ant problem. And they all died and just blew away in the wind. Is that something that mosquitoes thrive on, or can eliminate them.
Yeah, generally for the most part. So what you're using is a essential oil or a derivative of citrus oil that can be used for those control purposes. And they're great when you're doing just these small applications. They are extremely difficult to accomplish with sustained efficacy on an area-wide basis. So for the most part, for mosquito control, those essential oils just have not been effective in reducing populations on an area-wide basis. But another thing, just a side note for you, a lot of those products also have a little bit of dish soap in them as well. And so one of the things that people don't realize is you can just mix a little bit of dish soap with water, and you can use that as an insecticide if you have a small problem in your backyard as well.
Well, it does clean and it does remove the wasps.
That's right.
Thank you.
Sure. So was this, the things that I talked about as far as assistance and working together, is that something that you folks do or you folks could help us with if we are having an issue with a abandoned swimming pool in someone's backyard or a business that may be collecting tires for no reason?
Actually, that's quite, am I still on here?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I see a lot of different things on my phone to communicate, but unfortunately my computer screen shows everybody else muted. So I don't want to hog the show here. But in North Salt Lake, yes, we do have a lot of industry over on the west side that does harbor areas where mechanic shops and so forth have tire storage. That's quite common. Some of the other things that are prevalent here are some of the businesses have standing water for different reasons. You know, they go out with vehicles that have containers on them just for their different uses. And when they park, those containers maintain the water and whatever material they were hauling. So it does do that. Also, we have a limited amount of hoarders that you showed that picture of a backyard. And I thought, I checked it twice to see if it wasn't one of mine. Because we do have those here occasionally. Neighbors get to the point where they say, I've been nice to this neighbor and I just can't take it anymore. And those are things that we do get involved in, and it takes a long time to get that material moved. Is there a way that you and your people can maybe shortcut some of this? Because I have specific law requirements that I can't supersede.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, I mean, this is part of the reason why we generally try to work with the homeowner to kind of address the issue so that way we don't have to take it to the next level. And it's been very, very rare for us to get somebody from like the health department involved. But this is good to know. And if I may, I have another question as well. We're also starting to notice that our free-range human population is starting to kind of take over a lot of lots and abandoned locations, and they're also coming in with their own containers and things like that. We do provide them services. We try to control the mosquitoes as best as we can, and we provide them with repellents and personal protection measures that they can take themselves. But how do you guys handle those abandoned locations with that population? Are you guys getting rid of them, telling them to move, or can you have them maintain some sort of sanitation? I know that may be a pretty complicated question, but.
I can't speak for everybody, but here in Saratoga Springs, luckily we don't have that big of a problem with those kinds of populations yet. But we're very much on top of any time we see even a suspected abandoned camp or anything, we're on it. Buildings, get it torn down, whatever we need to do. So we're very active And then just speaking to your other point, just real quick. So as a growing city that's still being built, I know that's kind of a rarity in Salt Lake County anyways. But here in Utah County, specifically with Saratoga Springs, we have ordinances in place for our businesses that are currently being built, that they're not allowed to keep any kind of outdoor storage. So think of even a grocery store that puts their planters or whatever outside to try and sell them. We tell them you cannot have those outside of some kind of covering. So like a Smith's or a Walmart that wants to put in, a store or whatever, we tell them you can do that, but you can have outside sales, but it has to be covered by an awning or something. And that was directly related to mosquito issues, mosquito abatements, that kind of stuff, trying to keep those populations down.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, well, if there are no more questions for me, I'll just leave it with Randy Pond. You have a perfect name for mosquito control. So if you ever want to leave UOCA, we got a spot for you.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Well, thanks, folks. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Very informative. Thank you.
Sure thing. Good day, all.
Okay, I think that concludes the meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, very good.
Very good.
I'm glad are we recording still?